You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Welcome back to the Sons of Shoe. Nick Wilson, Spencer German. And today's going to be a little different. We're reacting to the NFL draft, and the Ohio State focus is kind of where we're going to go. The 4 draftees, the several undrafted free agents from Ohio State, where they landed, and of course, what it means for Ohio State. But as we are a relatively new podcast, please make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, 923thefan.com, the free Odyssey app. If I mentioned Apple, please follow the show. And, of course, follow 92.3 The Fan's YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button there and then like our videos. We do appreciate your patronage. But hi, Spencer. How you doing?
Good, man. Busy weekend with the draft, and I think really just sports in general. There was a lot going on this weekend. So, but doing well. And, I'm excited to talk about the draft a little bit. How about you? How was your weekend?
Well, yeah, between 3 Guardians games, the Cavaliers game, the overall NBA playoffs, basically 3-4 games a day, and then the NFL draft, like I didn't really have a weekend. Oh, and I did a 5-hour national show on Saturday, smack dab in the middle of the Cavs playoff game and day 3 of the NFL draft. So like, and let me be clear. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, holy crap, that was a lot.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those weekends where you kind of collect yourself on Monday and you look back on the weekend and you're like, holy shit, I did a lot. Like I was pretty damn busy. I think I felt that way too, just with everything I had going on with the draft. But yeah, definitely a busy weekend.
And I don't know that there's a non-sporting event, meaning a non-game sporting event that I watch with the ferocity that I watch the NFL draft. Like, I'll be honest, dude, like I watched every second, like to the point I was falling asleep on Thursday night in my chair and knowing I had to wake up at 5:45 to get up with my oldest daughter. And then Friday night, same damn thing, watching till, the wee hours of the night. I think it went on to 1 or 2 in the morning. I don't know because I could barely stay awake. And then, I'm hosting a 5-hour national show starting at noon on Saturday. And I have the Cavs up on the TV to my right, and I have the NFL draft on my laptop here. And I just got to be honest with you, dude, the NFL draft to me is a flawless event because if your team has a bunch of picks, man, you're so invested, and maybe you paid more attention to the college game that year because, you want to see who's going to become the next LA Ram or the next Detroit Lion or the next Cleveland Browns. And then if you don't have, like the Browns didn't have a first-round pick this year, or if you don't have a lot of picks in general, you have massive FOMO. So, like, I have a buddy who's a Bears fan who had the 1st and 9th pick. Once they made that pick, it was like late day 2 where they had a pick again, and he was like texting me. He's like, man, what am I doing here? I can't wait to pick 75. So, like, I just think it was really – and so to me – it is the flawless event. Every fan can be happy on draft day, even if you don't like your draft picks. And again, it is one of my favorite events every year. And that's a wild thing to say, considering there are no winners or losers declared truly till about 3 years later.
So it's funny you have that stance on it. And listen, I'll say this, like I enjoy watching the draft from home. I actually said, though, on Sunday on 92.3, I had the take that I think the NFL has brainwashed us into thinking that we need to, like, participate in the NFL draft, and it's really not as and I mean this from, like, a standpoint of, like, the crowds in Detroit. Like, listen, props to the Detroit folks for showing up and showing out, setting the record for attendance. But
allegedly, we don't know that. We don't know we can trust those numbers.
That's fair. That's fair. It's
that's Michigan math.
They might have been flying in some fake people on planes and dropping them in, and just like the election.
Does that include the prostitutes that were in town for such a big event
and the strippers? Like how the strippers show up to the Super Bowl cities too.
Yep.
No, my thing is, though, I can sit and watch the draft at home and enjoy it and get through and be fine. I think the people that stand there for that, and listen, night one is one thing. Like, okay, I get if your team, especially if you're like a Bears fan, I get showing up in Detroit and being there to see Caleb Williams come out, and you had a pick in another pick in the top 10. So it was like there was all this excitement early on. But I can't imagine going to like day 2 and day 3 of this thing, just standing there. Like, you're not watching anything. You're just watching people walk out and announce picks. So I think the draft is cool. I've always enjoyed the draft. It's a lot of fun to cover. I don't think it seems like the least enjoyable experience ever to be there in person for it. I couldn't do it.
But they had 5 current Detroit Lions come out and hype the crowd up by saying, "Come on, let's go." All right, now you. Hey, you know what I'm hearing? Jared Goff. Man, those Lions players might be biting kneecaps, but they sure as hell cannot get a crowd riled up there.
And so what I compare it to, Nick, is from what I've heard, and I know, like, my mother-in-law, she's always told us one of her bucket list items is to go to New Year's Eve at Times Square. And anybody I know who's ever gone to New Year's Eve in Times Square, they say it's actually a miserable experience because you get put in this like gated thing, and you're just in this gated thing, and you don't leave, and you stand there for hours. And if you got to go to the bathroom, you have to like leave, and it's like this complicated thing to get back. Like you basically can't leave for hours, and then you just wait for the payoff is 10 seconds of the ball or the minute of the ball dropping on the thing, and then you get to say Happy New Year in New York City. That's the payoff, and they're like, yeah, it's not real. The juice isn't worth the squeeze on that. I just feel like from a home viewing experience, being at the draft in person feels like the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Maybe I'm wrong. I know we had it in Cleveland a couple years ago. It definitely wasn't worth the squeeze that year because it was the COVID year. But I just, I don't know. I don't think being there in person is for me.
Well, now we got to get it back so we can know for certain whether it's worth being there in person or not.
Yeah.
But while we're on the topic of the draft, which is going to be the entire topic of today's show, in case you guys haven't figured that out one yet, 4 Buckeyes were drafted this year. The first one off the board, as expected, was Marvin Harrison Jr. And, was it Arizona? Was it going to be New England? Was it going to be maybe Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers? And in the end, he goes pick 4 to the Arizona Cardinals. And I don't know about you, but now, then this is funny because people in the NFL are a little bit down on Kyler Murray. Marvin Harrison Jr. is finally going to play with a level of quarterback that deserves his level of talent.
Yeah, I think, what I found sort of funny about the whole thing was after all the smoke screen season stuff of, his tape just doesn't wow you. And I think a lot of that was just you watch the guy's tape over and over again that you're like at a point where it's like, okay, I've seen it all. How much more excited can I get about this guy? And people were trying to hype up Malik Neighbors as potentially the first receiver to go. And so I just thought it was funny that in the end, he goes probably where he should have gone as what many people considered the top non-quarterback prospect in the entire class. And he goes as the first pick that was a non-quarterback. So that felt very fitting. And I do think on some level, like, yeah, there's questions about Kyler Murray and his desire to care about football, I guess, on some level, his commitment with the video game stuff that was in his contract and all these different things. But I think Kyler, like, especially late last year when he got back from the knee injury, he looked really good. He started to look like the quarterback that we knew from a couple of years ago. And, second year with in the offense that he's in with the new head coach, and you get a chance to add a weapon in Marvin Harrison Jr. And listen, let's face it, like, the Cardinals needed it. They lost all their wide receivers this offseason. Hollywood Brown isn't coming back. Obviously, the offseason before that, you lose DeAndre Hopkins. So he steps in day one as like their number 1 wide receiver and gets a chance to really prove himself with a quarterback who I think can certainly make the most out of his talent. And I think that's the key thing too, Nick. Like, we always talk about situation mattering. To go somewhere where you already have an established quarterback, I think is a good thing. I think Marvin Harrison is like the rare example of, even if he had a bad quarterback, he would still put up numbers because he's that good. But to go somewhere where you have some stability at that position, I think is huge for him.
Well, and I think, I'll be honest with you. I think we've just kind of started to hate on young Kyler because people bestowed him the label as franchise quarterback, and then they got a $200 million contract and all this. I mean, the guy just hasn't had a chance to prove it because he hasn't been healthy.
Yeah.
So, and I think if you look at it, like, Nuke Hopkins, when Nuke was healthy with Kyler, that was a top 5 quarterback wide receiver tandem in the NFL. And I think Marvin, it's funny, man, like, obviously we saw Marvin with CJ Stroud, and they had a really good relationship, but it never really felt like Ryan Day fully unleashed CJ Stroud, right? It felt like there were things that you could have done with CJ, like watching CJ just move. She's actually really, really mobile. And, I don't think he was ever destined to be a running quarterback, but that's because he's such a good passer and he's so good in the pocket, he doesn't need to be.
Yeah.
But we talked a lot about why did Ryan Day wait till the Georgia game to get CJ Stroud moving? I mean, I kind of look at this and I think to myself, I don't know that Marvin has ever had a quarterback fully at his disposal that was being fully unleashed by a system, by a play caller. And obviously this year, I'll be honest with you, when I watched Marvin back, and I think I said this in the last podcast, when I watched Marvin back, it was when you watch throw after throw after throw by Kyle McCord from this last year, the trend is obvious. The ball is almost never on time. And when I say on time, I mean leading him to be able to make the next big play.
Yeah. There was a few, but that was it. Yeah.
Everything Marvin had to do this last year was adjust on the fly, which I thought showed a incredible athletic IQ that he was still able to turn some of those whoops. You're going this way, he throws behind you, and you make it seem like a flawless catch and a seamless transition and into a 50-yard play. That's what he did with a quarterback who, again, I just don't think was good enough to truly be Marvin Harrison Jr. or Ohio State's quarterback. You now go with Kyler Murray. And again, I think the stock is down on him. I don't know Kyler's ever going to be a top 5 quarterback, but consistently, can he be a top 12 quarterback? 100%.
Yeah.
And can Marvin Harrison Jr., listen, how I build a roster, and this is probably another thing that I've bored you with, how I build the roster is get me strong in the trenches and we'll talk from there. I know Arizona does have Paris Johnson. They've started to build in the trenches. I don't know they have the kind of trench warfare that you need to be consistently good every single year. But once you get outside the trenches on both sides of the ball, the next best friend a quarterback can have is an elite wide receiver. And I think Marvin steps into the NFL with the right quarterback to let him hit the ground running. He will not have to be the only playmaker there like he was for half this last year when Travion was out and Emeka was out. This is a dude who's stepping into an NFL offense with a legit NFL quarterback with legit playmakers around him, and I think that'll only make him more dangerous in college or in the pros. And you might be able to make a case he might end up being a more productive, not a better, because he's still the talented guy. He might end up even being more productive in the NFL than he was in college because of this marriage with Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if you're looking for if people are concerned about his ability to, get the most out of Marvin or whatever, people can't forget it wasn't so long ago that when Kyler was healthy and he had DeAndre Hopkins healthy as well and on his roster, that first year they were together, Hopkins had 1,400 yards, 6 touchdowns, and over 100 catches. He's proven that when he has an elite wide receiver, he's going to get him the football and he's going to make him a productive player. I think you can even look at last year when he finally was able to play with Hollywood Brown, and even the year before that when they were playing together for a good portion of the season. I mean, Hollywood Brown, who's a fine receiver, he's only gone over 1,000 yards one time in his career. He had over 700 yards and 3 touchdowns that first year together, and then last year had 574. But again, with varying quarterback play until Kyler was able to come back and play, and those last couple weeks were some of his best weeks of the season. So yeah, I think Kyler's clearly a guy that's going to get the most out of that player, that position. When he has a talented wide receiver, he's going to use them, and I think it's a good spot for Marv to land, and probably the right spot in terms of the pick that he was selected. Like I said, being the first non-quarterback to go. Here's an interesting hypothetical for you, Nick. So if the Cardinals had traded, let's say the Cardinals had traded out and the Vikings traded up and got JJ McCarthy or something like that, whatever. If the Chargers wound up being the team on the clock to take the first non-quarterback, do you think that, because did you hear Jim Harbaugh's quote about how his quote about offensive linemen and how and they consider offensive linemen weapons or whatever?
Yeah.
Do you think he was so inclined to take a offensive lineman because that's just the Jim Harbaugh way that he would have still not taken Marvin Harrison Jr.? Or do you think he would have taken Marvin Harrison Jr. if he would have been there at 5?
I think he would have taken Marvin Harrison Jr. at 5. I just think and by the way, I love
because here's the thing.
I love they picked Joe Alt, by the way, but I think he would have gone Marvin.
I just think Jim Harbaugh is such a different breed, man. Like, I think he's so in his own. He's going to do things his way. Like, I wouldn't have been surprised. Now, listen, we'll never know, but I wouldn't have been surprised if he ended up taking Alt anyway. And it was like, yeah, no, we just felt like we really need offensive linemen. We're trying to protect our quarterback, and we're going to build this thing in the trenches. And I consider offensive linemen a weapon. And everyone's sitting there like, well, why didn't you take Marvin Harrison Jr.? So I thought that was an interesting question because that was the talk, right? Was if he's there at 5, does he take him in the whole Ohio State-Michigan ties? But I found that kind of funny.
All right, guys, do you think Marvin Harrison Jr. will walk into the NFL as one of the 10 or 15 best wide receivers? I think the situation's right for him. I think it's all about health in his rookie year. Leave your comments on the 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel under each of our videos there. Make sure to hit us with a like as well, or at Nick Wilson Says on X and Threads, or Instagram if you want to be cheeky and slide into my DMs, or at Spencito _ on X. When we come back, there were 3 other Buckeyes drafted. We'll get into that, and the numbers don't lie. But real quick, a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back, guys, as we spent a lot of the first segment talking about Marvin Harrison Jr. getting drafted number 4 overall in the NFL draft. The Buckeyes only first rounder this year, but Buckeyes go on board. Mike Hall Jr., the defensive tackle, goes to Cleveland at pick 22 of the second round. Cade Stover, Kyle McCord's Whoopie for half the year, goes to the Houston Texans with a 23rd pick of the 4th round. And then the final Buckeye drafted this year to the Raiders in round 5, linebacker Tommy Eichenberg goes with the 13th pick in round 5. And I got to tell you, this is where we get to do the crossover Cleveland and Ohio State thing. I think Mike Hall Jr. is the perfect fit for the wide 9 scheme that the Cleveland Browns run under Jim Schwartz. Obviously Mike's a little undersized for defensive tackles, but I think when you start to look at what kind of scheme takes most advantage of you, it's obvious to say a 4-man front as opposed to if you're having to play either 5 technique or you're trying to play nose. So that would not have worked with Mike, or at least it would have been a tougher transition. But I think what makes the wide 9 specifically as a 4-man front so dangerous is all Jim Schwartz talks about is your get off, right? How quickly can you get off your spot and up into the line? And listen, Mike is still a young developing player, but his number one trait is he might have the fastest first step of defensive tackles, which is saying something because there are a couple of undersized guys, Johnny Newton from Illinois. There are a couple of undersized guys that can really fly in this draft. Byron Murphy of Texas who went to Seattle, but Mike Hall's just elite first step speed is something that I think could really allow him to make an impact in Cleveland this year.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I listen, I understand the undersized thing. I just think, especially where he went, and I know the morning show on 92.3 The Fan, they had his coach from high school from Strongsville on this morning, Monday morning. Oh yeah, sorry, Streetsboro. My bad.
I mean, you got to. I mean, just love up on Portage County, buddy. Just remember, we don't get a lot of love, so when there's a chance, you got to love us up, okay?
And he kind of talked about part of the reason he thought maybe he was not on some teams' boards or maybe was on other teams' boards was just a scheme fit thing. And I think to your point on the wide 9 and Jim Schwartz defense, I think you're right. Like, he's a perfect fit scheme-wise for what they want to do. And that's why I think the undersized part doesn't necessarily matter as much to a team like Cleveland because, they already have, like, if you're looking for a guy who's going to be like that space-eating defensive tackle, the Browns already have that. It's Dalvin Tomlinson. So he gets to kind of play partner in crime to him, the Robin to his Batman when he's in there, and has a chance to just kind of get after the passer, which is what he's best at, and use that for that quick twitch off the snap to get to the quarterback when Tomlinson's in there sort of eating up multiple blocks. So I think it's a great fit. And I also think the other reason it's a good fit is because with Schwartz's defense, we know how much they love rotating defensive linemen. And the biggest thing with Mike Hall is he's going to have to stay healthy, and he's going to have to prove he can stay healthy. And so I think the fact that he doesn't have to step in, like we're like Nick, I mean, you and I know the years and years spent like hanging on every draft pick as the franchise saving player for the Browns. Like we thought that was what it used to be, was the first round picks, the second round picks. We were counting on those guys to be instant contributors to this team and then, help them get over that hump to finally be a good team again and get, restored to the glory days of the Cardiac Kids and all that. But he's coming into a situation where he doesn't have that pressure to start immediately. And because Jim Schwartz likes rotating guys, he's still going to see playing time in his first year, but he's going to get to work with so many different bodies and so many different groups of people that he can learn some things, he can pick up some things, and he can just go out and play football at a high level and see what he kind of brings to the table. So I think it's a great fit.
Well, and I think more importantly, congrats to the Cleveland Browns for finally drafting a defensive tackle that can get after it.
Yeah.
Jordan Elliott, by the way, I think by the end this last year, I actually thought he showed a little bit of being a good football player. I just don't think he showed enough to warrant bringing him back. I think he might be that change of scheme guy who might be better in his second destination. But, like, that was your best pass rusher you've drafted at the defensive tackle spot, even last year. Like, you mentioned Ika. And I have nothing against those big space-eating guys, but that's not what this defensive line needed.
Yeah.
Like, when you've got a defensive line with Myles Garrett, and the whole point of the wide nine is see ball, get ball, see quarterback, get quarterback. It didn't make a lot of sense last year to take a 340-pound space-eating defensive tackle. So, I think it's really easy to look at a Michael Hall Jr. and say, and you mentioned health, that's huge. Production needs to take a step up. Like the Browns love to draft guys who were, they were productive in college, but because of their athletic score, you can see them taking a step forward. If he plays up to his athleticism, he could finally be a defensive tackle that could start across from Myles Garrett for the next 5 to 7 years and be a guy who gives you 5 to 7 to 9 and maybe more sacks per year. And that would be gigantic when we talk about production from the Browns defensive line.
Well, and let me say this in relation to Michael Hall Jr. And I don't want to put like unrealistic expectations on him, but he does have the nickname among his Ohio State teammates as Baby Aaron Donald. And what I think is funny is we talk about undersized and all these different things. If you go back and look at Aaron Donald's scouting report coming into the NFL, he weighed 285, which Mike Hall's listed at like 290. So he's even 5 pounds heavier. And people thought Aaron Donald was a fourth to fifth round pick. He ended up going in the first round. Like I'm not saying he's going to be Aaron Donald, but I'm saying like there's an example there of you don't have to be this big space-eating defensive tackle to make it in the NFL and have success. His game is going to be about rushing the passer. As long as the Browns know that and they utilize him in that way, I think he's going to be okay. And I think it's also, to your point on them drafting a pass-rushing defensive tackle, it's a far cry from – I don't think this team in the early days of Andrew Berry being GM really prioritized defensive tackle. But since Jim Schwartz has come in, it's clear that they've put a bigger emphasis on that because they know Jim Schwartz uses so many different guys and so many different bodies. He's done that at every stop he's been at.
Now, I feel like I'm othering the other two draft picks. Cade Stover going in the late fourth round or mid-fourth round to the Texans, and then Tommy Eichenberg going early in the fifth round to the Raiders. I'll be honest with you, I don't think either of these guys went to a bad spot. I was a little bit surprised that Eichenberg was drafted this high. I think if you look at like his grade from NFL.com, it's like a 5.93. It's kind of like maybe seventh round, maybe priority free agent. But by and large, like I like where these guys went. And I think Cade Stover going to Houston. I think both Stover and Mike Hall Jr. could end up being much more productive and maybe I said this about Marvin too, because of the quarterback situation. I think those three guys have a chance to be really good in the pros. And I think Stover in particular has a chance to catch people off guard. Like it's possible for a top 64 pick to catch you off guard. You never know with mid-round tight ends who's going to become Rob Gronkowski and who's going to become, Shlomo Schlemiel. But like I give Cade Stover, I really like him as a player. I don't know he'll ever be tight end 1, but a good tight end 2, I think, is absolutely in play there in Houston across from Dalton Schultz.
Well, I know we kind of want to talk about like best fit, worst fit type thing for all these guys. I don't know that there's like a flat out worst fit. If I was saying worst fit, I guess I would lean Eichenberg only because it's the Raiders, and I just don't trust the Raiders to turn anybody into anything. Although I guess they did it with Max Crosby, so there's someone they got one right. But anyway,
you got one.
But I don't want to disparage any of the other guys on this list because I think Marv I think is going to be successful wherever he would have ended up. So I don't know that there's like a bad fit for him ever. And I think Mike Hall Jr. ends up in a good spot too with Cleveland. I think Cade though ends up in the best position of all these guys simply because he's reuniting with CJ Stroud. Like that's a guy who knows his game already, who knows like they kind of have that camaraderie, that kind of trust for where one's going to be on any given play. And, Stroud's going to be able to hit him in stride and figure out know what the nuances to his game are already. I don't think there's a better place he could have gone. Now I understand he won't necessarily be, tight end 1, especially when they have Dalton Schultz there. But when he's out there, I'm actually really looking forward to. It's hard because being in Cleveland and working at 92 Through the Fan, where we're talking about the Browns all the time and we cheer for the Browns and support the Browns, it's hard because the Texans, they're kind of like a pseudo team of mine. I don't really root for them, but I always kind of have my eye on what they're doing because I really like CJ Stroud. And now they add Cade Stover to the mix. They're like Ohio State, Texas, and they're building this great team down there. And I'm excited to see what it all kind of turns into and follow CJ Stroud career as he continues. And he's been everywhere, I feel this offseason. So I think you couldn't have asked for a better fit for Cade Stover to just reunite with the quarterback that really, I think, put him on the map a couple years ago at Ohio State.
And I also think he gets to go and be weapon 5 or 6. And anytime you've got a guy that has that kind of athleticism, that kind of build, and he's like your 6th read, I think that only makes him more dangerous as teams start to clue in on the kind of known playmakers there. Now, we've mentioned only 4 Buckeyes drafted. I really wasn't surprised by that number, other than maybe I was surprised it wasn't 3. I mentioned Eichenberg, but Josh Proctor, Matthew Jones, Steele Chambers, Xavier Johnson, Mayan Williams. Did any of those guys going undrafted surprise you?
No, I thought Proctor maybe had a chance to be a 7th rounder. But that was, I think that was kind of the cutoff for guys that I thought would really get, would really be drafted. I think the rest being undrafted free agents, was kind of fitting. Maybe Mayan Williams, as a late running back grab, but I think teams obviously realized he's going to be there when the draft ends, so he'll be an undrafted free agent as well. I actually think of all those guys that did sign as undrafted free agents, I'm really excited to see what Xavier Johnson does because Xavier Johnson, he was that Swiss Army knife player for the Buckeyes. He did a little bit of everything, and he's going to a team in Buffalo where they now are kind of revamping the weapons in their offense and how they're going to utilize guys because Stephon Diggs is gone. So to see how he kind of fits into all that and what they use him for, whether it's special teams, whether it's as a gadgety type player, and I know they have Curtis Samuel for some of that too, another Ohio State player. I'm kind of curious to see how that kind of pans out. But no, I think the 3 to 4 range, I kind of went in assuming Harrison, Mike Hall, and Stover all would get picked. I think, to your point, I think Eichenberg was kind of a fringe guy. Maybe he would go at some point, and I think his story, being a guy who's high motor, really good leader, that probably helped boosted his stock a little bit more too. But yeah, I think who went made a lot of sense. And it was kind of in retrospect, kind of a down year for Ohio State players this year in terms of guys that got drafted.
Well, and I think what's interesting about it is people have downplayed that it was a down year. I don't think we should be doing that. I think, listen, if this next year really is the all aboard, we got to win a national championship or compete for it, we got to beat Michigan again. If we're going to go, if we're thinking that way in August, September, October, November, December, and January of next year, if we're really thinking that way, then I think this should be something we pay attention to. It's like the limited contact in the spring game. I don't know that is the biggest deal in the world, but I can't dismiss it out of hand because Ohio State has not met our own expectations the last couple of years. And the way they've not met them are a lack of physicality and looking like they're the lesser talented team. So I don't want to make the biggest deal out of the lack of or limited physicality in the spring game because I understand it. But I think when you start to put that with, all right, now we've got the least amount of Buckeyes drafted since maybe the end of the Tressel era.
Yeah.
Like that is noteworthy. That is something that should not be denied. When you then also consider Michigan did pretty darn well for themselves, having 13 players drafted, setting their own record coming off, the national championship year. I don't want to make a big thing out of it. But I think, if next year we're talking about, well, 3 guys got drafted again, 4 guys got drafted again, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that Ryan Day has a different zip code because that, that's not, Ohio State is built off of, we're going to get your asses to the pros. And we do that because we're going to have you in all these big games and we're going to put you in a position to ball out. It's noteworthy only 4 dudes got drafted.
I think it's a well-founded point by you. I don't know, like you said, that it's like sound the alarms, everything's falling apart. I think we're giving them a chance this year because of what they did in the transfer portal and the guys that they brought in, and they're going to be super talented. And to be clear, I think next year you're talking about like 10 plus guys. Just the sheer number of guys that came back on defense this year. Like if Jack Sawyer had gone into the draft this year, he probably would have gotten drafted. Like he would have been a 5th guy that gets drafted. So there's just so many guys on the defensive side of the ball in particular that I think are going to go. You can probably throw Emeka Egbuka into that, both the running backs. Like there's going to be so many guys next year that I think will get drafted that I think it's going to be okay. We'll be talking about this much differently next year. But I do think it's another sort of wake-up call moment for them of like, hey, we pride ourselves on getting these guys the pros, and we only got 4 in this year. It's why they went out and invested the way they did in the NIL and made sure to build this mega super team that they have, that they're hoping not only wins them a national championship, but gets them back to sort of that reputation they have of being one of the top teams every year that's putting talent into the NFL. So I think it's a good point that, you don't have to freak out about it, the sky isn't falling, but it is notable, and it's another sort of, elbowing Ryan Day like, hey, you got to get this, you got to get your shit together.
All right, guys, is only having 4 players drafted this year, is that another sign of the things might not be what we want them to be in Columbus? Make sure to leave a comment in the video there on 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel. Make sure to like those videos as well. We like your likes and we love your interactions. But you can also hit us up at Nick Wilson says at Spencito_. When we come back, we will take a peek to next year and how it might look a little bit better, at least according to one NFL mock draft. That's next. But first, a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back, guys. We're talking about the Ohio State impact of the NFL draft this year. A little lighter than we're used to. Only 4 drafted players, although Josh Proctor, Xavier Johnson, Matt Jones, they are 3 of the undrafted kids that have signed to this point. Still nothing for Mayan Williams, but you and I were talking about kind of next year going forward. And, we also referenced Michigan getting 13 players drafted, a record for the school. And I think next year has a chance to be Ohio State's big comeback, because I think next year, I think this Ohio State team is similarly loaded to what Michigan was this last year. Remember, Michigan had guys with COVID years and 6-year seniors and all this stuff that happened because of all that roster building over 5 or 6 years. And I do think that aided to their depth and their dominance. Well, look at Ohio State. For as much as we want to talk about guys that go in the portal and have left, you've got a lot of super seniors. You've got a lot of guys who've been at Ohio State or been playing college football for several years, more than normal. I think that bodes very well for Ohio State doing well in the draft next year.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think your comparison to Michigan's pretty solid in terms of just like the talent they have coming back. I mean, I brought it up last segment, but just the defense alone, you have so many guys that I think are going to be draft worthy. Whether it's Denzel Burke, pretty much the entire defensive line, Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau. I think I'm never going to get it right ever.
Hey, you got it right this one time, even though it took a minute, but you got there.
I always have it right in my head. And then when I say it out loud, it never works. But anyway, yeah, like the entire defensive line pretty much has a chance to be drafted. On the offensive side, you got both Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. There might be an offensive lineman in there that finds his stock rising this offseason and makes a play for the draft. And then obviously on the outside, the receiver position, you got Emeka Egbuka as the big target out there. So as the next great wide receiver prospect to come out of Ohio State. So yeah, I think you're talking about a number of those guys probably being first rounders. And I would venture to say Ohio State probably ends up with double-digit draftees next year, which, like you said, is a step back in the right direction towards what the program's more accustomed to.
Well, and what's funny about what you're saying is it wasn't just that they had only had 4 guys drafted. We're used to having 4 guys in the first round.
Yeah.
And I was looking at USA Today had a first-round mock, the all too early. And granted,
by the way, but
it's because here's the thing. It favors schools like Ohio State and Georgia and, the schools that have that it's just easy to bank on their talent. But that being said,
the other reason I hate them is just like there's so much that's going to happen. And so like they prognosticate like, well, here's where these teams are all going to finish. And it's like, guys, the Browns went from like a non-playoff team that would have been drafting 12th had they had a first pick 2 years ago to them being in the 20s this past year because they made the playoffs. Like, you just never know where these teams are going to draft, like what their needs are. Though, like, it's basically like overlooking the entire draft class that just got drafted and being like, well, we just assume that this thing is still going to be a need for this team, even if they drafted one of these guys already. Like, I don't know. I just hate it, but that's beside the point.
Here's the funny thing that you say that is that the Cleveland Browns, who were a playoff team, are not treated like a playoff team. And this is they are like a mid-round team. So they're like a mid-first round team. So go bleep yourself there, USA Today. Now, with this being said, Ohio State has 6 players coming off the board in the first round. If I asked you to pick who you think has the best chance to be the first player taken from Ohio State next year, who would you say off the top of your head?
Top of my head, I'm torn between 2, but I think I would lean Emeka Egbuka because just because of the value placed on wide receivers at the NFL level. If he goes out and has a big year with Will Howard as the quarterback and puts up the numbers, somebody will maybe move up to get him, or he'll be valued at a higher level because he plays that position specifically. But the other one I think would be close because there's a supreme value on this position is going to be Denzel Burke because lockdown corners I think are hard to come by. But
did you look at the mock draft first?
I mean, I skimmed through it, but I
did you see that Denzel was the first one? I don't think I would have picked Denzel to be the second guy. I might have said Tuimoloau or Jack Sawyer. I think you cheated. You cheated.
No, I really didn't cheat. Like, how was it cheating? I'm giving you my opinion.
I know. I feel like you're. Like you're like I'm going to say Emeka Egbuka. But really, I'm going to hedge my bet with Denzel.
No.
I just my
answer is Emeka Egbuka. I'm not riding the fence on this one. I just said I thought Denzel would be like next in line. But to your point on like the pass rushers, I think for me, and again, this goes back to what we sort of said about the silliness of these way too early mock drafts anyway. I think a lot of that is contingent on like how those guys look. Like if Jack Sawyer was touted as the next like Joey and Nick Bosa when he came to Ohio State. I don't think he's gotten there yet, but we saw him in the game, the bowl game against Missouri. That was maybe the best he's looked in his Ohio State career. So if he takes that next step now, 4th year in the program as a leader on that defense, and he becomes this elite level pass rusher, then yeah, I think then the math changes on like, do I think he now goes higher than Emeka Egbuka? Maybe, because pass rushers, again, another premium position at the NFL where they want those guys. And the same thing with JT Tuimoloau. Like if he has another great year, maybe he's going higher in the list. So it's kind of a wait and see thing with all these guys. But I think sitting here today, just because of I've seen it from Emeka Egbuka, and I know wide receivers so valued, I would say Emeka Egbuka.
Well, and don't sleep on Tyleik Williams, who they do have going in the first
Yeah.
round as well. That was a guy. So it's funny, Jack Sawyer, I thought really the last 3 or 4 games of the season, including the Michigan game, including the bowl game, including all the lead up to it, I thought Jack Sawyer was really special. I thought Tyleik was just consistently really, really good. And I, especially the second half of the season, but like overall, I thought Tyleik, I think it would not surprise me if Tyleik had a kind of out of nowhere monster type year this year. Now, I thought what was interesting is, and I think maybe the most interesting draft stock for Ohio State, I think some people will say Will Howard, and I totally get it. If Will Howard comes out and balls out, which he has not done to this point, if Will Howard comes out and balls out, I could see Will Howard really going from maybe a day 3 pick to maybe being a guy that gets up there on day 1 or even early day 2. But to me, the most interesting draft stock is Travion Henderson, because Travion is the guy that when he gets going, you cannot doubt he is unstoppable. And for as much as we've talked about Marvin Harrison Jr., once Travion came back, it was punch for punch who was more important to that Ohio State offense, which is wild because Marvin Harrison Jr. might be the best football player, or might be the best wide receiver we've ever seen come out of Ohio State. So I think Travion's a guy who, if Travion had been there for 3 years, clean bill of health, and just played every game, I think Travion would have been a top 32 pick.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a chance in hell he'll be one now because the injuries history. And somebody in the second or third round is going to get an incredible value because that kid can ball on Sundays.
I kind of feel bad for Travion, and it's an unavoidable thing, just the injuries he's had. But like coming in, I mean, he was drawing comparisons to like Maurice Clarett, like those days of Ohio State, and like Heisman Trophy candidate, and he is that caliber of a running back, which generally would get you, first round conversation at the NFL level when you're that good. And we know like the value on running back in the NFL goes down every single year. So of course there's like less and less. I mean, Trey Benson was the first to go and he went like late second round, I think, or something like that. So it's a missed opportunity for him. If he goes out and has a big year though, he can maybe gain his stock a little bit. I do think the injury history will scare some teams away from him being a first rounder, but he's maybe the one, to your point, that has the best chance to increase his stock next year of all the players that we've kind of rattled off here as potential first round picks or just in general draft picks for the Buckeyes. I think it's definitely him if he has a big season.
I will say though, the guy that I'm most, so this is obviously 1 year out. The guy that I'm most curious about how people view him will be Sawyer. Yeah. And a lot of it is, and so like Tuimoloau, I think you just watch the tape. The dude makes special plays. Tyleik makes special plays.
Special players.
They've got a lot of those guys, by the way. But with Jack, it's not that he doesn't pop off the tape. It's just that like, the guy that he reminds me of, and this might sound like I'm trying to knock him. It's Vrabel coming out of Ohio State. Where Vrabel was like, well, we don't know if he's a 4-3 edge. We don't know if he's a 3-4 edge. We don't really know where he fits. And then he went to Pittsburgh, which is a place where usually they crush those kind of picks. He was okay in Pittsburgh. It wasn't until he got into New England where they really unlocked the full Vrabel. And it's because they didn't just pigeonhole him as a one-type player. And I kind of think that's Jack Sawyer. Like, and by the way, I think Jack's a little bit bigger than Mike was in college. But, like, I think Jack could be one of those guys who might end up not being a first-round pick, might not end up even being a second-round pick, might kind of be overshadowed by Williams and Tuimoloau. But once you get him into the right situation in the NFL, could end up being a guy that just plays a decade long. Vrabel played a decade plus, and really the key to his run was health and landing in New England after that rookie deal in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're all excited about the guys on the offensive side of the ball for Ohio State this year and seeing what they bring to the table and what Will Howard's going to look like, what the sort of two-headed monster running back's going to look like and how they utilize those guys. But I'm with you that one of the more curious players to keep an eye on just this upcoming season for Ohio State is going to be Jack Sawyer, because I mean, I truly, Nick, like after the one positive I felt after the Missouri Bowl game, the Cotton Bowl. It was the Cotton Bowl, right? Peach Bowl?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't do that because
I always mess them up.
You've said it so many times that it's now breaking my brain when you ask me the fucking question.
It's the Cotton Bowl. Like that was the one positive I had was how dominant he looked. And again, if that's like setting the stage for him to have one of these just, double-digit sack seasons where he's just wreaking havoc, yeah, like his stock's going to rise. And it's going to mean good things for Ohio State. And I'm like super excited to see what the next phase of Jack Sawyer looks like.
All right, guys, we want to know what was your favorite draft pick where an Ohio State Buckeye landed this year? I think 3 of the 4 guys landed in spots.
Yeah.
I'm very convinced that they're going to be nice NFL players.
We also want to know, I was going to say, who do you think is going to be first off the board for the Buckeyes next year?
Yeah, and don't hedge your bets and look at a mock draft like Spencer did.
I'm
not accusing. I'm just saying. Please make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, 92.3 The Fan, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned Apple? We like when you're appling with us. Also, please hit the subscribe button on 92.3 The Fan's YouTube channel. Comment on our videos, like our videos. We appreciate all the interaction. I like to hop on there once a day or so, or every couple days, to make sure that we're fulfilling our promise and interacting with you guys. Spencer, good show, buddy.
Always a pleasure, Nick. We should be back later this week with more Ohio State current roster episodes. So we look forward to that, guys.
We'll get to it, guys. Go Bucks.